In connection with the attack on the United States, the Lord told his prophet there would be an attempt to overthrow the country by destroying the Constitution. Joseph Smith predicted that the time would come when the Constitution would hang, as it were, by a thread. And at that time, this people will step forth and save it from the threatened destruction. It is my conviction that the elders of Israel, widely spread over the nation, will at that crucial time successfully rally the righteous of our country and provide the necessary balance of strength to save the institutions of constitutional government. Now is the time for us to get ready.
Welcome to the Nauvoo Legion podcast.
Cool. Well, nice to meet you. Welcome everybody to the Nauvoo Legion podcast. Today I'm here with on Instagram. His tag is American Revolutionary Fitness. So nice to meet you, Gage. So yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Just kind of want to get your opinion on a few things that are going on right now in our country. So I think we're living in a time where people just are more fearful to speak and just say what they think. And so, we just need to have more conversations as America, asking ourselves, like, what is the purpose of our nation? Who are we? Where are we going? And so, yeah, man, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you just decided to start your page. And
yeah, absolutely. So as you can see, well, like he said, my handle on Instagram is American Revolutionary Fitness. So a little bit about myself. I always knew from a young age that I was meant to be sort of a difference maker. So from a young age of 4 years old, I knew I was going to be a Marine. Did that going up, enlisted, 17 years old. Went, did that, served 4 years. I was in from 2018 to 2022, first Light Armored Reconnaissance. So basically, it's just kind of that same thing. Like I took that same mindset that I had growing up of wanting to be a difference maker. And then I kind of rolled that over into health and fitness as a start. So as soon as I got out of the Marine Corps, I got certified as a personal trainer. I started trying to go about it that route, try to get people more fit, more healthy, stronger. Because as a man, being strong and fit, that correlates to where your confidence is going to come from. And as a man as well, it's a non-negotiable to be fit. Because as a man, you're meant to be a provider, a protector, and somebody who can lead the way. And if you're not, you're just not living up to your true potential. But so it's basically that mindset that also led to me kind of starting to speak the same message about Christian nationalism, American nationalism, kind of going back to our roots. Because like yourself, I'm very, very loving of actually looking into history, because we can never believe the official narratives we've been told.
mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of having the confidence to speak up about those things and actually getting more and more men involved, speaking up and willing to do what's right.
Yeah, for me, it's just about, what can we do to help our country, help our nation. Seeing the situation and where it's going, it can often look dismal. And so
Yep.
I just want to give people some hope and, see what we can do. So, and then, so you started getting into fitness, and then after that, what did you go from there?
So fitness has been an instrumental part of my life growing up. I was always in sports, stuff like that. So fitness was always there. But my last few years in the Marine Corps, I went from trying to do bodybuilding. The pageantry of it just wasn't all that appealing to me. And I ended up getting into powerlifting, whereas it was more of a competitive sport based on the output that you're allowing yourself to actually get out of it. So it's actual feats of strength. So that's essentially where I got after the Marine Corps. That's what I've stuck with, and that's kind of how I try to get people fit, is through those same principles: strength, hypertrophy, because those carry over to, like I said, that confidence, being able to actually protect and provide and use that strength for actual purposes rather than just looking good.
Oh, no, thanks for that. Sorry, I had a little
Yeah.
audio issue there, but yeah, no, man, same type of reason I started getting into martial arts, because I was like, we can't, like, you should always be doing something to improve yourself and try to protect yourself and just develop your life. I don't think, life is short, and so you got to take advantage of it and be the best you can be. I don't know why you'd want to live any other type of life. So, I kind of really, something that really kind of woke me up in 2025 was just looking back into history, because when you start looking into it, you understand what you were taught was what certain individuals wanted you to think, right? Because it profited them or it helped them. And you start to realize how much of our country has been changed by propaganda,
Yep,
you know?
absolutely.
And so that's why it's so important to look back into your roots. And so recently, for this past year, I forgot one of my ancestors fought for the Germans. And that reminded me that, oh, wait a second, maybe not everything that I was taught is true, right? And you start looking into it and you find there's so much more information.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, like, just looking through history, you can find many, many occurrences where the official narrative, it doesn't line up with what actually happened if you just dig a little bit deeper. That's where most people fall short, is they don't really feel like they have to do any digging because they have that blind trust and obedience to the government.
Yeah, for me, I think it's been really what we're seeing in our nation is a transformation of the way we think, right? And different dominant cultures that have prevailed within our society over time. And there's one culture that's a culture of Christianity, I think, and one's more of a culture of just the world and just materialism and all of those other things. And so when you separate all the many things we've gotten by being the most powerful nation over time, if you take away God then from your society, then you can just look at Russia. Look what happened to Russia with the Bolsheviks. When they took away, what they did was they killed God. They killed the idea of God, and they put government in place of God, and handing their own responsibility to something greater than themselves. And it just caused millions of death. That's what communism is. And so it's just the same
Mhm.
pattern and cycle throughout all of history, whether it was a king or some sort of tyrant. And I think people don't, we just tend to forget who we are as a nation. And when you forget who you are as a nation, who you really are, what you actually stand for, and you become very materialistic, that's why we're at where we are, right? We have to take responsibility we have to stop blaming, other countries, other people, things outside of ourselves. Each individual has to take responsibility for themselves. That's the idea of a nation, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so, yeah, I kind of want to ask you your thoughts on, you know, I think I think what happened is, as a society, we have just in general kind of forgotten a lot of things we used to know. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the things in our culture that we're seeing, right? These repeated rhythms and things, right? Is because we haven't actually been talking about them and dealing with them. And so I wanted to ask you kind of your thoughts on World War II, and people now, that's kind of the big thing. All the podcasters and everybody's talking about World War II. But it's an important topic because just as Americans, we've forgotten. So I wanted to ask you your opinion on what caused it, and you know kind of some things maybe that changed your mind this last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, like I said, I was always just bought into that propaganda, that patriotism that you usually have from a young age. Like when you're a kid, you see all these war movies and stuff. You think, oh, cool, I want to go, I want to be a part of that. I want to do that when I grow up. So, like, just like most people, I bought into the official narrative for the longest time. But I think while I was in, I met a few buddies while I was in. I kind of started to get my head turning a little bit. I started to question, like, okay, it doesn't make sense why, like, the Germans, why they would just randomly go off the rails and just start persecuting Jews and like killing and murdering Jews. So I started to question that a little bit when I was in the Marine Corps, but it wasn't until after the Marine Corps, I think it was after October 7th, when all that was going on. I just saw too many things that were aligned with kind of what they were trying to say and that victimhood. So it made me start digging a little bit deeper. That's when I really came to find out everything that I thought was true, it just wasn't the case. Like even how we ended up getting started in the war. Because Pearl Harbor, yes, that happened, but like many other instances that got us involved in major wars, it was a false flag attack that the U.S. government allowed or perpetrated.
Yeah, and it seems like we've had a lot of these throughout our history, and we just haven't been honest enough with ourselves as a nation to admit the ways in which we've done wrong or we've made mistakes. And because we haven't done that, we haven't learned from it. So we keep repeating the same things. And so I think my goal with people is just to remind them who they are, what they're supposed to do, and what we're actually standing for, right? Good Christian values. We don't just go and attack a bunch of different nations for no reason, right? We don't just go and do that. There has to be God commanded certain things, right? And so it really goes back to our founding of the nation. It was actually a very Christian idea that King George didn't have the right to just no taxation without representation. Right. So we have certain rights given to us from God, and that's where we derive our freedom. It actually comes from God. It doesn't come from other things. And so because we've forgotten that freedom comes from God, then that's why we're seeing all these Marxist ideas that have taken over, because it's just replacing God with another ideology, something that's frankly the Antichrist.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of my biggest issues with the founding fathers was the fact that they didn't explicitly state that this is a Christian nation built on a Christian foundation with Christian values, because that allowed this little monkey wrench to be thrown in there, like, okay, freedom of religion. And now that's why you have this whole multiculturalism idea of, oh, okay, you're free to practice and preach whatever religion you want. But when stuff like that happens, that's where you get these conflicts. That's where you get this internal strife where there's not going to be any sense of identity, of heritage, of like common ground that you're going to be able to build upon. So I think ultimately in terms of our history and our founding, that's where my biggest issue with the Constitution comes in and what our founding fathers should have done better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more because just to us it's like pretty obvious that's the case, right? But for most people, they don't see it that way. They kind of teach it in a very secular way in school, to kind of spin it a little bit differently, to take God out of it more. And that was the whole idea of the revolution it was based on principle, Christian principles, right? And
Mhm.
in fact, like I believe it was 50 out of 55 of the constitutions of the people that signed like the Constitution. Um, a lot of those people, um, a lot of those people were Christian, right? I mean, the majority of them are Christian, and then 9 out of 13 of the colonies' constitutions, you had to aspire to some sort of belief in God that was a Christian view, which is kind of
Yep.
interesting. They don't teach that part of like, yes, it doesn't explicitly state that in the Constitution. It's implied because in the colonies that was a common requirement, right?
Yep.
To run for office, you couldn't even run for office. In fact, there's this one time where this guy said he was an atheist in court, and they're like, okay, we can't even believe anything he says because none of it makes sense. It's all garbage.
Yep. Well, that's also too where swearing on the Bible comes into place because it was just a commonality back then that everyone within the nation was thought of as Christian. It was a
Yeah.
Christian founding. You can argue that, okay, the founding fathers, not all of them were Christian. Okay. But a large majority of them were.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the Declaration of Independence talks about, that God has given us certain unalienable rights, as they say.
Yep.
So yeah, and then I kind of want to as well ask you about your opinion with certain things that are going on right now with like Venezuela, the bombing out there. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
So when I woke up this morning and saw that, my initial thoughts were Iraq 2.0. That they were building the same playbook back in Iraq. It was, oh, they have WMDs. We need to go over there and we need to take those out. Come to find out, there were never WMDs there. It was more so they didn't have a central bank. Israel wanted to install one there. They didn't have Saddam being the puppet that they needed him to be to destabilize the Middle East. And now it's a repeat. What was it? A couple weeks ago, I believe Trump designated fentanyl as a WMD.
Yeah.
So they didn't even try to change the playbook at all. And it's the same thing. They go down there, they're going to destabilize it. And what did Trump say today? Oh, we're going to have to go down there and we're going to have to run the government for now until we figure out a solution. It's the same thing that happened in Iraq. You took out Saddam, everything got worse. It fractures the entire country. You're going to have many groups pop up. It's going to be boots on the ground, in my honest opinion. Whether MAGA wants to believe it or not, but essentially, that to sum it up, it's just Iraq 2.0, just in different soil.
Yeah, and you probably have a completely different, view of things having served as a Marine than your average civilian. So, as somebody who actually has an expertise and understands the reality of war, right? It's always another country, it's always Ukraine, it's always Israel, it's always things outside of us. Um, it's never the introspection of what's wrong within our own nation. And that's the continual cycle of our nation, unfortunately. And I understand I'm in an interesting position because I know I actually know a lot of Venezuelans personally myself. I saw what happened with Biden. I actually lived on the border, so I got to see it with my own eyes for
Mhm.
2 years. I used to see people swimming across, coming across, and then um, and so it was interesting from that perspective. And then I came home to my own state and found that hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans had moved into my state. And it's like I'll go to the store and there'll be hijabs, there'll be everybody speaking Spanish. And I'm like, dude,
Mhm.
I live in one of the whitest places, dude. Utah, it's super white, but it used to be. Now it's like, you know what I'm saying? It feels sometimes I feel like a foreigner in my own nation. It's a very strange feeling. I don't know
Yeah, and
if you felt that.
yeah, so I was living in Arizona for a little bit after I got out of the Marine Corps. Like at that point, it had already started to get more multicultural. So a lot of the gas stations around where I was living, there were Indians there. Like where I was at, there was a synagogue, so I would see the Jews in their like stereotypical garb and everything, and just yeah, but yeah, no. Every state from conversations I've had with more and more people, especially over the past 2 years, whether it's the Biden administration, Trump administration, because they're both complicit, more and more people are flooding into our nation, but that's not by accident. It's just the clergy plan being played out in modern day, but they're just not calling it that. They're calling that, well, that's why all these wars come into play as well, because, for example, in the Middle East, they want to expand and create the Greater Israel Project. And to do that, they need to wipe out all these governments in the Middle East. And that's why they're taking those people from the destabilized nations and they're flooding them over here into our nations. And so the US and Europe, in order to destabilize us, because they're still holding that grudge about the Romans sacking their temple in 70 AD.
Yeah, it's I think what's happened is we've also forgotten that, you know, yes, we need to treat everybody with, love. That's a Christian virtue,
Mhm.
right? It can also be taken too far where too much compassion is also not a good thing. We have to remember Christ's love wasn't just unlimited compassion. We also have to remember he went in and flipped the tables in the
Mhm.
temple. So we also have to remember that there's a balance in all things. And I think
Yep,
we've forgotten that.
absolutely. Well, the thing is, too, you got to remember that in order to pour into somebody else's cup, your cup has to be full first. So if you're unable to sustain a functional country, a functional society with what you have, because you have all these people that hate you coming in, you're not going to be able to help other people as we're called to do as Christians. And like you said, we're meant to be loving, yes, but at the same time, we're not meant to allow the barbarians to just come in here and slaughter us. Like as you said, Christ himself, he showed love sometimes through righteous violence against against the principalities of evil. And as much as I don't want to have to do that, And well, this is kind of where I get really annoyed too, is when the government says who our enemy is. You have Protestants, evangelicals, and the likes. They'll support that. But when you want to stand for your people, because you don't want to see the evil come here, you don't want the barbarians to come in the gates and harm those you love, then they say you're not a true Christian. But at that point, you're standing for those you love because you don't want to see them hurt. And I think that's true love.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's a misunderstanding of what love is, right? And I think it
Yep.
goes back to again that, what is the foundation of our nation? You know, it has been the Constitution. It certainly has as a functioning government. And it's been the greatest document that this world has ever seen in far as governing. But it's only as good as the people upholding it. And so when you have a morally decayed society, a document that is not even adhered to, how can that function?
Yep. There's just no way it can, because once a nation abandons God, God abandons that nation. And that was apparent in Babylon. And the way I see it with our politicians now, we are modern Babylon. And whether we're being judged for it now or God's giving us the chance to rectify that and bring God back into our society, that's up to him. But for those that feel called to actually stand and recognize what's going on here, I implore you, take a stand, speak out, start doing things that allow for those you care for to be safe. Because if not us, there's not going to be anybody left to make that stand.
Absolutely. We have to be the ones that stand for freedom. Because what I realized eventually, I wanted to start getting more involved in politics, understanding what's going on. So I thought, you know what? Washington, D.C., that's like a million miles away to me, right? So, but I have my own backyard. Let's see what I can do right where I'm at. So 2024 comes around, and you know, I s- so I start looking around, and I had a friend that was working on a campaign for one of the people that was running for Senate in Utah. So I thought, oh, let me just kind of see how politics actually works so I can get a feel for
Hmm.
it and understand the system a little better. So I do, and then I'm helping this guy. I didn't help out. I helped out maybe for, 20 hours, knock some doors, talk to some people. Um, and then I go to the convention, and you just, at the end of the day, you just realize it's really the money candidate that always wins.
Yep.
And it's
Yep. And that's
almost
where
like,
all the attacks come in.
yeah, and that it always goes back to who has the money, because they use these tactics of they'll put a name at the top, and everybody, like in my state, everybody's Republican. So they just go, okay, Republican, Republican, sign it. They don't actually look into the people that are running for office. And you realize everybody's so distracted that if democracy is only as good as a people that can actually govern it. And as a nation, it's like people are so stupid to it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
why we're seeing, all these wars. That's why we're seeing the they can just cover stuff up in our face and keep going business as usual, is because we're such a morally decayed society that we just allow it to continue.
Yep. Well, not only that, but the fact that people, like you said, they just see a Republican on a ticket, like, oh, okay, they'll serve our interest. Meanwhile, like, that's just not the case anymore. People say they're a Republican if that's what's popular at the time. Meanwhile, their values, their principles, if they have any at all, they're a complete opposition of what it actually meant years ago to actually be a Republican. Because you see the Republican Party now, it's gay, it's satanic. You have
Yep.
the wrong people that are being represented as Republicans, and that's what drew me away from actually affiliating with a party. Back in 2016, before I went in the Marine Corps, I was a huge Trump guy. Even 2020, when I was in the Marine Corps, same thing. But then COVID hit, and then started realizing afterwards, like Operation Warp Speed, Trump kept praising it, praising it, praising it. No arrests have happened, and stuff like that, and they continue to get away with it because I'm circling back to the point now. People treat politics like sports. If they have to
Yep.
align with their team and the other team is always inherently wrong. Like it's just black and white to them. Whereas they have lost the ability to actually hold politicians accountable because they have to feel the need to relate to their party.
Exactly. It's become this cultural, like it's almost like football teams at this point,
Yep, exactly.
that we're all rooting for. And then there's no zero accountability.
Yep.
It's the same games. It was the same games in Rome,
hmm
the bread
And
and the
that's exact.
circus.
Absolutely. And they knew it worked back then during Rome. So they just use the same playbook. They call it something completely different. They use the same tactics, and people just keep on going through the motions just because they'd rather have a savior and somebody in the government than actually have to address the fact that they may have to be called on by God to do things themselves.
We People no longer hold themselves accountable for even the
Yep.
simplest things. Not
hmm
even going to the gym. There's people. Our society is so lazy. It's like 40% of people are like obese.
Yep.
you know? And so on the one hand, when I see these things happening, I'm like, man, that sucks. On the other hand, I'm like, well, I guess we're just that nation that's become such a pride fest. It's so disgusting,
Right.
And then
It,
I watched this documentary recently on Netflix, which is the propaganda machine for the Revelation 2 and 2:9 people.
yep.
That's what I say now. I don't just come out and say it because people get so offended and emotional because
Yeah.
they don't understand the spiritual warfare. But um, you just continue onward. And anyways, I was watching this documentary, and they were bragging about Berlin in the 1920s and how they were producing all of this pornography and homosexuality and the first transgender,
hmm
the very first, Magnus Hirschfeld, the sexologist doctor, the German. He wasn't German,
hmm
guys. He was Jewish, okay? And so when you understand that the issues that were going on in Weimar Republic Germany are the same issues that our nation are facing today, and it's the exact same playbook, it's it's almost laughable because once you finally see it, you're like, okay, this is where we're at.
Yep.
Here
Well,
we
that's
are
where the
again.
age old thing. Yep. Well, that's where the age old thing. Those that don't study history are doomed to repeat it. It's very apparent nowadays. And
Yeah.
those that sit there and blindly believe the official narratives, that's who just treats politics like sports. That's who treats politicians like their football teams. But those who actually study it, like yourself, many in our space, we look into history because we just had that calling. God wanted us to explore and look into the truth a little bit more. We see the patterns. We see how it played out before, so we can recognize what's going on now. So that saying, I never recognized how true that was up until the last few years.
Mm. And then it's the same playbook always. And I just
hmm
hope that we get to the point where we get our identity back because it's always because the reason we have multiculturalism is because we've lost who we truly are. That's why it's continued for so long.
Yep.
And so that's just been interesting to me in 2025. It's like we're so dumb about history that we're still arguing about World War II. That's how retarded we are as a nation when it comes to
Right.
our own history. And so it's just sad to see how lazy we are. And so I think the best thing we can do though is going back to what you were talking about at the beginning of just taking care of yourself, your fitness, you know, being the best possible version of yourself, whatever that looks like. That's different for everybody. Everybody's mission is different in life. Um, but we need to unite not under diversity because Christ never said to be diverse. He said to
No.
never, right?
hmm
But he did say to be one. And so the way we get back to that is to become one nation under God, and that God is Jesus Christ. So
Absolutely, brother.
and then kind of last question for you. What was your biggest takeaway from or spiritual awakening in 2025?
I'd say my biggest takeaway is that I think we're finally at an inflection point. People are finally fed up with being lied to. They're over the corruption, over their money being used to fund their demise and eradication in their own nations. And I think that it's only just the beginning. I think just as the bad things in history have repeated themselves, God always finds a way to get the truth out there. And God always finds a way. If we choose to actually follow God, he finds a way to make things happen. That was apparent in Spain before the Reconquista. That was the case back before we even had a nation. Well, the backs were against the wall, yet because we had God, we overcame, we defeated the British, and now we're where we are today. And the same could be said all throughout Europe. So I think ultimately, just the fact that more and more people are waking up, more and more people are getting tired of being just obliterated by these tyrants. I think with that, more and more people are turning to God, and that I truly love to see it. So I think the fact that more and more people are turning to God, I think it allows us the opportunity to overcome anything that's being thrown our way.
Absolutely. Um, I think it's all goes back to the responsibility that you take for your own life. You know, there's always a bright opportunity out there if you're willing to put in the work. Even as messed up as everything is in our country, you can still have it, but you have to work for it. That's the reality.
Yep,
That's always been the reality. And so we can become a great nation again, but we actually have to put in the work to make it happen.
absolutely. And the things that are worth having, they don't come easy. But it's when those things get hard is when you lean on God for that strength, and God will carry you through.
Cool. Well, one last bonus question for you, and then we'll finish up. So just kind of a funny one because this one always freaks people out. Do you
Yep,
think the good guys lost World War II?
absolutely, brother. Absolutely lost World War II. The good guys won. We wouldn't be having the same problems Weimar Germany had nowadays.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, I never thought I'd be saying that, but then yeah, you start looking into history and, you know, you start finding out the truth.
Yep. As
So,
much as people don't like the truth is the truth. It's not objective. Well, it is objective. It's not subjective, I should say.
yep. And the uncomfortable truth has been covered up for so long that now that it's finally come to this, that's the thing about the truth. It always comes to the surface, even as you can bury it as far down as you want, but it always comes to the surface. And I think it's just taken 100 years for reality to set in on understanding
Yep.
true history. And if we can learn from it, then we can be a great nation again. And if not, well, we'll have to repeat the suffering.
Absolutely. I feel like we're at the last major inflection point that God's going to allow for us, and it's up to us as men of God to lead the way, bring more people to Christ, so that way we can finally make a stand against all that's going on.
Amen. Amen. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your thoughts. I hope that everybody got something out of that. So just keep putting in the hard work until next time. Nauvoo Legion.
Absolutely.
All right.